Great, welcome and good afternoon, everyone. I'll just mention again, for those of you in back, if you're able to, if you could move forward, that would be wonderful. We're still going to have some more people joining us, but I wanted to get started on time. It's great to be here. This is our panel on challenges and opportunities in providing evidence-based treatment for persons in the criminal justice system, which I think is the longest title of perhaps any of the panels that we have here at the conference. So thank you for joining us. It's great to have you today. Greetings and welcome to our session. Just to introduce myself briefly, I'm Roger Peters. I'm a licensed psychologist and emeritus professor at University of South Florida in Tampa, Florida in the US. I'm vice president of ICU DDR and also on the leadership team of ICATI, the International Consortium for Alternatives to Incarceration, which we're going to be talking about today as well. Also a consultant to INL and the Colombo Plan. So very happy to be here to welcome you to the session. I do want to, before we start, I want to thank our conference hosts, of course, ISUP and ICU DDR, and also to the partners of ICATI, the consortium to establish a network of countries and individuals committed to developing treatment alternatives to incarceration. And those partners include many organizations, but I'll just name a few. The Colombo Plan, of course, CCAD OAS, UNODC, African Union, and many others as well. Also like to thank, of course, our sponsors for the organization ICATI, which is the U.S. Department of State, INL, for supporting the development of ICATI, which just began at the Commission on Narcotics Drugs back in March. So very new organization, and we're very happy to be able to sponsor this workshop today along with ICU, DDR, and ISUP. I'll introduce each of our presenters as we go forward, and we'll save time for questions at the end of the session, if that's okay. I just have a few quick observations and comments before we get started and turning it over to our panelists. I think as all of us know that persons in the justice system have a greater need for substance use treatment than others in the general population. We'll look at the numbers as we go through our presentation today. And there are many challenges to implementing evidence-based treatment in criminal justice settings. I worked in prisons, in drug courts, in jails, and worked with the probation population providing treatment as a clinical psychologist. And I know in doing consulting also for the U.S. Department of Justice and other organizations, I visited many of these programs in both incarcerated settings and out in the community. And there are a lot of challenges in implementing evidence-based treatment. So I'm really looking forward to the comments from our panelists today to talk about some of those issues. Of course, we know prison overcrowding is a huge issue for all of our countries. And so providing opportunities to divert people from prisons using evidence-based treatment is a very key ingredient. And of course, quality of treatment is important as well. So we'll be talking about that today. Just a very few quick comments before I turn it over to our first speaker. We know that within the justice system, both alcohol and drug use disorders are much higher in prevalence, right, than the general population. And so this is for alcohol and also drug use disorders. We had the Women's Recovery Network that was launched, or the Women's Network that was launched today. And we see that in the bottom part of this slide, that women actually have a higher percentage than men of drug use disorders in the justice system. So interesting different dynamics. But the overall picture is one in which most people in the justice system need some type of services for their substance use disorder. So in the United States, over half the people have a diagnosable substance use disorder, some not requiring treatment immediately, but most everyone has exposure either in the past, very recent use, or at risk in the future. Not all of those people, of course, need intensive treatment. And so part of our job, and you'll hear from the panelists, is how to prioritize scarce treatment resources in our countries for those that need it the most, in which we can have the biggest impact for reducing recidivism, increasing employment, reducing substance use, and saving money for the community, and making the community safer, of course. Last point, just very briefly, we know that there are many opportunities for providing evidence-based treatment throughout the continuum of the justice system, and we'll hear more from our panelists today about each of these. So without further attention to my slides, I'd like to introduce Dr. Goodman Sibeko. Serves as Associate Professor and Head of the Division of Addiction Psychiatry at the University of Cape Town, and a Director of the U.S. Department of State-funded International Technology Transfer Center, ITTC, in South Africa. His work has focused on interventions using non-specialist workers in the management of severe mental illness, and he is a developing research portfolio focused on task-sharing models for the treatment of harmful substance use, mental disorders, and HIV. So please welcome Dr. Goodman Sibeko.
Hello, everyone. I was just here earlier, so it's strange to be back again. So what you see in that photo is the choir from the Department of Justice and Correctional Services, because we work so closely with them. So they tend to be there whenever we have a meeting with the ministry. They're a wonderful choir, and I think good friends of mine at this point. So I'm just going to go over what Department of Justice and Corrections. It gets confusing, doesn't it, Roger, in South Africa, because we have Department of Justice and Corrections, and we have the Justice Cluster and the Corrections Cluster. But it's one department. So if I say DCS, I'm referring to the Department of Justice and Correctional Services. I'll discuss the need that they came and shared with us. I'll then discuss why we chose to use the assist as an intervention to meet that need, and what the implications of the work are that we embarked on, and then talk about what follows. So Department of Corrections, as part of an ongoing collaboration with us, came to us and said they're aware of what they're finding in seizures, they're aware of what they're finding entering correctional facilities, they're aware of what law enforcement is picking up at ports of entry, but what they don't know is what are the levels of risk for substance use within correctional facilities. I know that can be a little bit of a tricky ask, because you're trying to establish how much substances are actually entering the system, and to get accurate information is quite tricky. So they wanted us to find a way which also aligned with their renewed focus on the public health provision of care for inmates. And so our solution was the assist, and I'll get back to that in a moment. So they wanted us to characterize for them the extent and nature of substances of abuse within the prison population. But in addition to that, they wanted us to help them capacitate the Department of Correctional Services to train providers within the Department of Corrections. And these providers are the wardens who intake the clients, and they're also the social providers and the healthcare providers within the system. And then the purpose was then to capacitate these providers as a resource to provide screening, brief intervention, and referral to treatment as an evidence-based intervention. Now, I'll talk about some of the challenges in terms of what happens if you find somebody that needs to be referred on in the context of the prison system. They then wanted us to produce the findings that come out of the screening using the assist tool in order to assist them in developing their policies further and formulating strategy for how best to provide that public health focused intervention for facilities for correctional facilities. So we chose the assist. So remember, the question was, what is the nature of substance use within the prison population, and what is the level of risk across the population? So we chose the assist. Why did we choose the assist? Because the assist allows us to, first of all, get a sense of the levels of risk, but at the same time provide an intervention. Because part of what we know is that there's limited resources in general for mental health and substance use, and that more so for correctional facilities. So we wanted to provide them a tool that not only detects levels of risk, but also provides an early intervention. So as you would know in this room, the assist allows you to get a sense of risk for the past 3 months as well as over a lifetime. It's comprehensive, so you can use one tool to get the job done, which is great because you're not flipping between various screening tools. It provides a level of risk for each substance, and importantly provides a platform for the provision of brief intervention, which seeks to answer that question of, well, we don't have the resources to refer people onto but the brief intervention actually provides a platform for you to prevent some folks who might be at risk of progressing to worse disease from doing so. And further context to this is that, in fact, only 1 in 20 people who ever get screened actually require referral to specialist assessment and care. So a lot of people will actually benefit already just from the brief intervention component. So you're capacitating the correctional system in conducting screening while also giving them the capacity to provide brief intervention. So what we did with Department of Corrections is we trained the core management group, essentially to obtain buy-in from them, so that they had a good sense of what ASSIST is, had a good sense of what the value of screening is, had a good sense of where brief intervention fits within the context of corrections. We capacitated them to then train on, to be able to do a cascade training to the providers at corrections. We then provided them with paper assist tools. They used these tools within their correctional facilities, and what's important to note here is that there were a few logistical issues involved in using the paper assist. So they had to complete so they had to be carefully trained in how to complete the tools, had to complete the form, score correctly, submit the form to the Central Department of Corrections office. That had to be sent through to UCT. UCT had to University of Cape Town. Must remember not to use acronyms. University of Cape Town had to send it through to our data analysis folks, who would then work with that. So there's a lot of opportunity here for human error. But nevertheless, we were able to work with that initial data set and get a sense of what the risks were. So I'm not going to present the full scope of what the results were, because that's work product between ourselves and Department of Corrections until such time that data is published. But if you look, for example, at amphetamine, if we look at globally, we saw that there was a very low level of risk for amphetamine amongst respondents in this case, and and then the second level was the moderate risk and a low low preponderance of high risk. But what corrections is able to see here is that there is an issue with amphetamine, even though the higher levels of risk are quite low, but it's something they can target. And then each facility, you're able to see what the stratification of risk per substance is. And so on the next slide, you see, so in South Africa, we have something called Sekendo. So Sekendo measures treatment demand data. So when people go and get care for substance use disorders, that data is reported to Sekendo. So the treatment demand data is reflected geographically across the country. So what was interesting for us is the patterns of risk across the correctional facilities match the treatment demand data for the corresponding treatment facilities within the area. So that's very interesting. So even though one measures the risk profile and the other measures treatment demand, the data seemed to match. So we're still waiting as the ASSIST data continues to come in to see if that continues to hold true. So based on all of these technical challenges or these human error challenges that we faced, we then developed a web app version of the ASSIST that removed the need for folks to be trained. It removed the possibility that somebody could forget that they haven't selected a specific substance down the line. It also removed the human error of data capturing and analysis. So we've automated the entire thing. If you want, you can point your phone at that thing and it'll take you straight to the web app assist, and you can play around with it and see what you feel about it. You can enter false information if you want. It doesn't matter. So in terms of this web app assist, it provides for people to self-screen, so you and I can get a sense of what our levels of risk are per substance, but also for practitioners, whether it's in corrections or in the public health sector. So the key features of the assist are that it's anonymized, so no one's contact details are captured, we won't know who you are. There is a random code that's generated that can then be linked to a file, so that data is separated from identifying data, so that should that information be required down the line, that code will enable us to draw that down. Any device, it's data light, and it's automated, which removes the training burden. But importantly for me, I put reduced training burden there on purpose. In fact, it eliminates training burden. Anybody can do this. So I put reduced just to cover myself in case somebody decides to sue me after I talk. But in fact, it actually eliminates training burden entirely. So what's great is at the end, there is a screening report that includes a guidance for the brief intervention, which can then be screenshot or emailed. So that's great. But this talk is not to go into too much detail detail about the web, so I'm going to move on from that. So the key thing to talk about is what are the challenges and opportunities for Department of Corrections having tried and having adopted the assist. So in terms of opportunities, we are very lucky that we have executive buy-in. And I say this with caution and anxiety because we've just come out of an election and we don't have a government right now. So in case you don't know, our president is taking very long to name his cabinet. So we have no ministers in South Africa right now, which means there is no executive. However, the previous executive has written this into local policy for the department. And we're waiting to see about how we engage the new executive and take things forward. DCS, or Department of Corrections, has available social and health providers. So the cadres are in place already, and they already have linkages with referral, health, and social care services. So these are opportunities for development or further development of the public health approach for Department of Corrections. And of course, they have various contact points. We decided it wasn't ideal to screen people at intake for obvious reasons. People don't trust the system at that point. But if you screen them at a point where they're having a social or health review, that's more likely to be successful. The challenges are lower management buy-in. The most recurrent excuse I've heard is I haven't received the memo. So I think, if you work in government, if there's no memorandum from the executive that goes down the right pathways, then people won't do it. So that's the challenges we're having at the moment. And of course, availability of technological equipment and just internet signal at peripheral sites especially. And of course, disparate distribution of treatment centers. So not every correctional facility is located in close enough proximity to a treatment provider for substance use disorder. So it's a question of do we need to provide additional capacity within Department of Corrections to provide that care? But if we do, can it be just substance use? The answer is probably no. So if we place providers in Department of Corrections, they would need to do more than just substance use and probably be focused on mental health and other intersecting concerns as well. And there's also just a lack of clarity about referral pathways. So people know people need assessment, but people don't always know how to refer on. So Roger, don't panic. I'm skipping all of these. I put them there just in case we had time. So that's that for that. So thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sibeko. Very interesting. I just want to comment, it's always helpful to have a rock concert in the background as you're providing a panel presentation. One of the challenges, the additional challenges, right, not in providing evidence-based treatment, but in presenting. The other thing I didn't mention in the introduction is Goodman is now the director of the Science Advisory Council. Did I get that right? For ISUP, which is an important new role and a new function for ISUP. Let me just make a couple comments before I introduce our next presenter. So I think, as we all recognize, that identification of substance use disorders is really the starting point of evidence-based treatment, right? You can't separate out screening, assessment, and treatment. In my experience, and probably yours as well, many countries do not have the type of standardized and universal screening that Dr. Sibeko has been talking about with the assist, or they don't use an evidence-based instrument to do that, which is really critical. This is important because we miss people who are, that have substance use disorders throughout the system. They're not placed in treatment, and they actually are at higher risk for relapse and rearrest when they leave. So it's so important to help to identify and to triage and refer people to the appropriate level of treatment based on, as Dr. Sibeko mentioned, the severity of the substance use disorder and also the risk for rearrest in the future. The last thing I'll mention is that I think this is also a manageable intervention, isn't it? In our justice systems, if you think about making a change, it's not an easy process, as you mentioned. It takes time, it takes buy-in, there's a lot of challenges there. But if you're going to start somewhere, it might be good to start at the front end to initiate a universal screening and then assessment process within the criminal justice system if there is none in your country. So I was in Paraguay and Ghana for different Fulbright assignments in the last 10 years. And in many of the prisons, for example, they didn't have any universal type of screening for substance use disorders. And as a result, can't identify the need and justify the need for additional resources, right, in these settings. Good. So that's a very interesting start to our panel today. And I think the ASSIST instrument is one of many, but one of the most important evidence-based screening instruments that can help refer people to different levels of treatment. So thank you very much. Our next speaker is Antonio Lomba. Very happy to have him as part of our panel. Antonio serves as chief of the Institutional Strengthening Unit at the Executive Secretary of the Inter-American Drug Abuse Control Commission, or CCAD, with the Secretarial for Multidimensional Security of the Organization of the American States, OAS. That may be the longest title of anyone presenting today. Antonio has 25 years of international experience working with different institutions in the areas of public policy, including drug policies, of course, justice reform, institutional development, higher education, and capacity building programs. He also has significant experience in working with Latin American and Caribbean countries, EIJ member states, and Eastern European countries, Uganda, and the Democratic Republic of Congo. Thank you. Please welcome Antonio Lomba.
There you go. Good afternoon. This is nap time in my country, Spain originally. It's time for people to take naps, not to listen to presentations.
In a dark room, right?
Well, so what a pleasure being here with you all. Thank you for attending this session. I'm going to be talking about some things about alternatives to incarceration, and I'm very glad to see that there are some judges and representatives from some of the countries where there are some alternatives to incarceration in place. One first question that people think is, why do you start an alternative to incarceration project? And it comes from different reasons. I mean, what I've seen from the Organization of American States as we work with countries is that first is no model is the same of the neighboring country. Even within countries, you have different models being in place. I'm just seeing our colleagues from Peru. There's a judge back there, and from health. They've been implementing alternative to incarceration from the fiscal districts and also from the judicial district, and they have different approaches to that. In Costa Rica, for example, that we have a person here too, they've been approaching the whole alternative to incarceration from the restorative justice approach. We have a judge from Trinidad and Tobago here. They started with the policy paper, and then other countries like Jamaica started with the legal framework. And why did they start? I mean, we have Chile here as well with a lot of, there's a lot of different models. What I will say is that even though methodologies could be similar and approach is the similar one, the reasons are different. They are different. Some countries, they start because of the cost. They need to spend less or more and focus their budget in certain things because they need to be accountable to their taxpayers. Some countries, they just, they're overwhelmed with the overcrowding of prison or the judicial system. In some cases, there are many, many reasons why a country will decide to go into alternative to incarceration. There's a common thing, though, that is, I will say, the frustration word. There are judges here that suffer that, or even defense attorneys, prosecutors, people that see individuals going back to the system again and again, and they can become worse every single time they open the door, the so-called revolving door. And I think it's important that they understand that the reasons are completely different, and so the approaches needs to be different as well. I'm going to talk about a few things here, but I'm going to start just to give you, a one-shot picture why the Organization of American States, an international organization, we work together with UNODC, with many other organizations, regional, internationally, but why we are in this? We are in this because member states, they request that. All countries that sign in a way that they have a consensus within the Organization of American States, on that side of the Atlantic, in the Americas, they all agree that there are some priorities, and one of them is finding alternatives to incarceration, work on proportionality of sentences. There's kind of a big messages there. Now, different approaches, as I said. So there are mandates, resolutions. I'm not going to go into those things right now. I don't think it's worth going into that. But what we've seen in the region is that there are some alternatives that are more common than others. We analyze why some are more common or more popular than others. The drug treatment court is a very popular one. They call it differently. They call it drug courts in the US. The PTDJ, PJTD, therapeutic justice. They have a lot of names depending if it's in Panama or is in Costa Rica or is it restorative justice, therapeutic justice approach. There are different names for that. But normally, normally is that kind of a big concept of drug treatment court or drug court is the most common one. And it's the most common one because normally there is a legal landscape, there is a legal framework under which they can operate those models easily. And normally for mental health things or for addictions, a court can divert or can send a person to treatment, suspend the process or hold it, or there's many, many ways depending on the stage of the judicial stage. There's another common approach which is restorative justice. In Costa Rica or Chile, they have some countries, they prioritize the participation of the victim into the process. And they are completely different, all of them. And we've seen in Costa Rica in some neighbors in which they have a house, a normal house, in which you enter and you see a judge in the house. And it's a normal house that is close to the neighbor. So people don't need to go to a court system. And so there are different approaches. The big concept of therapeutic justice, but at the end of the day requires a multidisciplinary team to be working together. And this is a major thing because sometimes you see the big challenge on alternative incarceration is to change the culture, change the way people speak. A judge is being trained to be a judge under certain rules, and a prosecutor the same way, an attorney. Generally speaking, the judicial side have a language, an understanding of the system. The health provider comes from another approach as well. So putting all this together, health and justice, and then bring together social services and other actors, requires a lot of investment in changing the culture, in changing the registry, the language that they speak to each other. A judge to understand what is addiction, a prosecutor, the same thing, defense attorney, and from the health side to understand the language of the judicial system. If you don't have that communication, the whole thing just collapses because it's just, someone said that yesterday, the silos, you cannot work in silos on this. So you need to work a lot in kind of bringing all these teams together. There is another, I mentioned here the 767 Act in Costa Rica and also the 2292, a new law in Colombia, because these are new alternatives to incarceration that has to do with women in prison and household, kind of a different profile of alternative to incarceration for those women that either in Costa Rica, for example, they were forced by the husbands to bring drugs into the prison. They leave in the morning saying, I'll be back for lunch. They go into prison, forced by the husband, bring some drugs, and they're caught, and they go to, they stay there. They don't come back home, and they stay for years. So the system and the judiciary, the executive branch, they realized that cannot happen, so they found a way to get these women out of prison. They are not normal, regular, criminals. They just were forced to bring the drugs into the prison and find a way so they can not go, they can go back to their houses. So there is a kind of a program, an approach on that. The same in Colombia recently with the 2292. There are different approaches, particular for. I'm saying that because more and more you see the conversation on criminal justice system and gender coming up under the political discussion. There are some of the models that are very successful in some countries, but they have some challenges. I'm not saying that are impossible, and I'm glad that Mr. Jacques Charlier is coming into the room because the first one is deflection. Deflection is a model that is being used in the US, and it works well in the US, and you have an expert here in the room on that. There are some problems with deflection when you implement that in some of the Latin American countries, particularly, or in the Caribbean, because the police do not have the discretionality to take that case out of the judicial system. They need to send it to the prosecutor and go through that. So discretionality is a big thing, not only for police for deflection, but also for diversion programs. Some of them they can do it, some others not. There's some kind of a legal landscape that allows that to happen, and some others don't. Community courts, that's another model that is a promising court, a model that has a lot of wonderful, added value to it, but requires, sorry for the metaphor, the whole village. It requires a lot of actors to be involved. It's the same thing when you talk about juvenile justice. You need to have a lot of actors involved, not only justice and health. You got to have education, the family. Well, in the community courts, you got to have the whole community involved. And there is a lot of actors in the community, the mayor, the city, all the families, the people that are the victims of the whole thing. So is a kind of a restorative justice approach as well. Reentry programs has a challenge because even though they are very successful programs and promising programs, At the end of the day, you need to have a social integration program or route created for these individuals that are leaving prison. They go back to society, so they don't go into relapsing into, they don't go into the revolving door. There are some studies showing that 60% of the cases of people exiting prison, they go back to the judicial system in the first 3 months after exiting. Yesterday there was a presentation saying that even in the first 2 hours. Someone said that, I think was it you? Yeah, Jack? Yeah. So not even 2 hours or 3 months. So focusing on those 3 months is crucial. But for that, you need to have a path created, social integration. My colleague Elisa will talk about the CCM, the case care management system later. You need to have all the actors involved to helping that individual to find a job, to get back to education. Some of them, they have no driver license, they get back on track. So those are big challenges. I'm not saying that are not possible, but there are challenges on that. Right now in the Americas, we had in 2001, there was only three countries, Canada, the US, and Jamaica, exploring alternative incarceration. In 2008, we added Mexico joined that. In 2024, right now, we have 18 countries exploring or implementing alternative incarceration of different kinds. And I say they're all different. I mentioned Peru before because they have different approaches from the Fiscalia, from the prosecutor side, and the judicial side. I mentioned Costa Rica. There are some countries like Dominican Republic that started with just control de ejecución, with one particular already with people in sentence, with some people prior to sentence. The US has a lot of different modalities on alternative incarceration. Canada, the same thing. If you go country by country, in some countries, they waited until they have an accusatory system in place and an oral system to implement alternative incarceration. So it was more challenging to do it with an inquisitive system. In countries like in Belgium, in Europe, they have a Napoleonic system, but the judge cannot be present in a pre-court meeting. So normally in these kind of settings, there's a negotiation between all the actors, health, justice, in which they all participate at what is the best approach to help the individual that goes through an alternative incarceration. In Belgium, the judge cannot be present there. In some other countries, even in the US, in Miami, for example, the public defender is not encouraging defense attorneys to be present in that negotiation because the victim, the person, the dependent should be present as well. So there's different approaches. I'm just saying that it's not a black and white thing and it's not on the rock. You gotta tailor-made this alternative incarceration. I want to focus on this for a couple of minutes because there are some things that has to do with capacities, and there are some. I'm going to go into those in a little bit detail, but a country needs to be able to have a regulation or kind of a capacity to regulate the alternative incarceration. I will go into that. A capacity to coordinate all the actors, a capacity to analyze the information. I have my colleague from the Observatory on Drugs here, Maria Heinz. You gotta get the information, analyze it, and build policy based on that information. On alternative incarceration, that is absolutely crucial. Who said the other day that it was like a vegetable? No, fresh and local. Yeah, that information needs to be fresh and local. And you got to have the capacity to deliver. And this has to do with many, many actors. So when we're talking about regulatory framework, like Jamaica, for example, started with an act, the 2001 Drug Treatment Court Act. So they started with a particular law because they didn't have it. Trinidad and Tobago started with a policy paper and then transferred into a judicial kind of a legal landscape. Chile, the same thing. Started with the countries decide whether to go with a policy paper, they go with the legislation, or they build it up later, or they use the legislation they have. But at the end of the day, all the legal landscape needs to be observed and see what kind of eligibility criteria you can fit in there, what kind of profiles. In some countries, you have domestic violence eligible for some of these alternatives. In some others, you cannot include domestic violence. So there's a lot of variety there. Coordination has to do with leadership. We have some judges here present. Judge Henderson here, Judge Christian over there. There are judges they just want to make a change because they see the whole thing going through the system again and again, and they want to be part of a transformation. So policymakers, sometimes they listen to judges or prosecutors, or they come to a conference like that and say, well, this will be interesting. And then they start the discussion. At the end of the day, coordination is, for me at least, is one of the key elements there. To be able to sit people together on the same table and discuss alternative incarceration, it seems to be a simple thing. It never happens. And most of the times that we go to a country and work and bring people together to a table, in most of the cases they say, this is the first time we talk to each other. That happens all the time. So putting people in the same room, and sometimes making institutionality of that means it's as simple as the first Monday of the month, there is a meeting with all the stakeholders, and we're going to talk about this. It could be brought by the mayor of a city, it could be brought by a judiciary, whoever the leadership is welcome to have that, or Minister of National Security, Minister of... So that coordination is, because there's a lot of actors involved to help an individual going through an intensive incarceration. You cannot go, normally the judiciary would say, yeah, let's go for that, but then if you don't have treatment on the other side, what are we going to do? Who are you going to send that person to? And at the end of the day, a judge needs to trust, a judge who is sending a person to an alternative incarceration measure, they need to trust the other end to know that that person is going to go through a path and there is a protocol, there's some standards, quality, I mean, all these things. Then is the demand reduction comes involved completely, fully, for the whole treatment quality. How am I doing time-wise? Good? Okay. Information gathering, once again with my colleague Maria here. You need to have monitoring evaluation mechanisms. You've got to create baselines. Why do you need to create baselines? Because normally you start a pilot project. But intensive incarceration is difficult to do that as a national level. I mean, you've seen the case of Chile in which they started small with a court, and then they built, and now they have a national policy in place, or Jamaica, or the US, or Canada. There's countries, or Mexico right now, there are countries that are building the national kind of a picture, but they start with a pilot. And for a pilot, sometimes you say, well, there's no beds in the country, there's no treatment in the country, and that is normally the common thing. You know, you don't have enough treatment to give a response to these models. But sometimes you don't need the whole country to have it ready for that. A pilot project, someone from Jamaica told me one time, if we need to wait until we are ready, we will never start. You got to start with the pilot and say, what is the court? Is in the main avenue of the city. In which corner? Between Main Avenue and 43rd Street. Okay, what are the treatment centers that are around 3 kilometers around that center? You have Alcoholics Anonymous, you have, what kind of things you have there? You have a residential, ambulatory, what kind of things you have there? What actors are involved in that kind of a picture? Once you have that kind of a 3 miles or 4 or whatever you want to calculate, then you see how you can start with a pilot project. Hopefully that whatever you have a pilot project going on and you can prove, and that's why information is important, that you can prove that that is really working, you can go to the national level and say, I've tried this in a pilot, and I know it's working, the investment is worth it, these are the results, I want to go national. It's just as simple as many times you do it in many other programs. So information, mechanisms to process evaluation, impact evaluation, just create a baseline, compare. I mean, all those things are important. That's normally people go into evaluation and things like that at the very end. You got to start with that. Deliverables and capacity to deliver. That has a lot of elements involved in that. But you have protocols created. You have the personnel. You have the human resources. You have resources at the end. Are you going to create new resources? Are you going to maximize whatever you have? Are you going to send people that you have in one department, move it to the other to create another? There are ways to do that. I mean, when we started with intensive incarceration, when Barbados started, for example, intensive incarceration, I remember the Attorney General saying, I don't have any funding for this. So we are going to reallocate the funding. We're going to maximize what we have. You got to use your imagination to make things happen. Of course, you need the resources, but maybe in the beginning, you just be imaginative on that. How many people are going to be involved? How many people are going to be training? In which level, etc. So the challenges, I mentioned some of them, you know, the discretionality in terms of regulatory discretionality, the legal landscape, that is a challenge. I'm not saying that is impossible, but that is a challenge. Coordination, why coordination is a challenge? Because of a rotation. And the clock for a policymaker may be 4 years. For this, you need more than 4 years. You need 20 years ahead of you. You got to have a vision on this. How do you play the political speed with the other speed? And that is a challenge. Rotation of personnel, training people. They come, new people. One time a Canadian judge told me that every single time he asked another judge or prosecutor to come to the alternative incarceration model, the rest laugh about it and say, how is your NGO going? Because it was like, this is not the real matter. You're soft on this, time. So dealing with rotation, eligibility criteria, analyzing who is eligible for a program. Not all countries think the same way in terms of eligibility. So I leave this here, and it will be on the website, but there's a lot of challenges here. I want to, because I have a minute or two, I think I covered this already. Yeah. The OAS, from the Organization of American States, we've created a lot of tools, protocols together, and by and thanks to the leadership of the countries, because this will not happen if a country is not committed. So most of the times, the country really are the ones asking for this. So creating protocols, creating manuals, guidelines for prosecutors, for defense attorneys, for the whole group to operate, because you have a new person coming in. If you don't have protocols, you start inventing something weird, and then it's not the model that you want to. So there's a lot of publication. There are some programs that are going on right now at the OAS. I'm not going to go into the details of that, but one of them, the case care management system, is what my colleague is going to present right now, which is, I think, is the crucial thing, because treatment is needed, the judicial side is needed, the health, but then the social integration component, I think, is as important as any other programs. We have colleagues from, I think I saw a colleague from Colombia as well that are exploring very interesting alternative incarceration in place as well. That's my name, my email, Lomba OAS. Contact me, anything you need, please let us know. We are a team, it's not myself, we have a big team, happy to help, just email us, and you have a lot of actors here involved. You have Jack, you have Judge, a lot of people here. So thank you so much for your time. Any questions? Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Antonio. Great. And for providing an international perspective on what we're doing in terms of providing evidence-based treatment. I think a couple of really interesting points that the countries can start with many different types of treatment alternatives, right, and programs. But important to start somewhere, that perhaps you have a champion or someone who has an interest, motivation, that has power to make some changes. And so that, as Antonio mentioned, this could be very different in different countries as to where that is. It could be a drug court, it could be probation, it could be a prison reentry, other type of prosecutorial diversion. But I think countries have to find where their most urgent need is, right? And what feasible approaches there are to providing treatment in the justice system. And there may be specific populations, right, that are most urgent. It may be in Peru with an adolescent youthful population. In other countries, it may be women that are in prison or that they want to divert from prison. It could be people who are accused or sentenced of drug possession cases, right? And we see in many countries that so many of those people end up in prison that could be placed with a degree of safety in the community, providing intensive treatment that's evidence-based as well, that would be more productive. Again, yeah, you have to start somewhere. The other thing I think that was really helpful is talking about the systems approach. These are complicated kinds of enterprises, right, to implement. And it really requires the involvement of the justice ministries, the health ministries, the community support structures, NGOs, CSOs throughout the country to make this work. And requires a lot of coordination, as Antonio mentioned, to bring people together that may not have worked together before. So thank you so much for your comments. I appreciate that. Next, we're very fortunate to have Elisa Rubini, also with CCAD OAS. Elisa is a consultant with the Institutional Strengthening Unit at the Executive Secretariat of the Inter-American Drug Abuse Commission of the Organization of American States. I did that twice, and without a problem. Okay. Elisa is the lead author of the Case Care Management Curriculum, and I hope you're familiar with that. She'll talk more about that. A very exciting new development that is a companion to the Alternatives to Incarceration curriculum for policymakers that's very helpful. Elisa has helped to coordinate international initiatives on CCM and Alternatives to Incarceration. She's the primary author of the CCM curriculum, so please contact her about that if you're interested in your country taking part in that. Also been involved in social integration for justice-involved individuals who have substance use disorders. Ms. Rubini has over 15 years of experience working globally with international and civil society organizations related to drug policy, alternatives to incarceration, recovery, and social integration. Please welcome Elisa Rubini. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Roger, for the introduction. And I'm in a unique position and very challenging because it's not just nap time, but I'm speaking after my boss and picking up some of the things he said and giving that the framework of what case care management is. As it was mentioned, is an initiative of the CICAD OAS, and it really wants to fill the gap and strengthen the program, the Alternative to Incarceration program. And so that's why, with the support of international experts in the field, we created this curriculum that is called Case Care Management. And the purpose of that is really to provide some answers. As Antonio mentioned before, the ATI program that have been implemented in different countries across the Americas have been evaluated through diagnostic studies, and there are some common challenges that the country present. First of all, there is room for improvement in the institutional capacity. The institution wants to be stronger, and it's not just because of the rotation, but also because they want to transition from piloting to strengthening, expanding, giving more opportunities to the people that are working in them, and they need to increase their capacity in terms of staff and in terms of reach out and coordination. There is also another challenge is the fragmentation of services. Sometimes services are available within the countries, but they are under different ministries, under different stakeholders, and not everybody has the full picture of what's going on in the country. And that provoke a factor that has an impact in not using fully the resources that are available. Also, in many of the projects and many of the programs, there are few key individuals. So it's based on individual, it's not systemic. So it means that these individuals are doing a marvelous job, but it stays just with them. If for any reason they transition to a new job, there is no institutional capacity. So all the work done get lost. And these key individuals are often overload with their workload, and they are not able to count and rely on assistance. And since here in the room I think there are a lot of practitioners, a lot of people working on the ground, I'm sure that you all feel this kind of frustration somehow in the work you are doing. And then is also the last common challenges that all these challenges open up opportunities, but there is a need of a process and professional figures that are able to follow up consistently during all the implementation of the ATI program. And this particular figure is the figure that we call case care manager. So before going to the solution, let's just have a look of this graphic that illustrates some of the most common challenges for the people that we serve, the people that are in the program. They are in the ATI program, they are the CCM participants. They have legal charges or conviction because this is why and how they got in contact with the criminal justice system, but they also have oftentimes health issues and mental health issues that are related or co-occurring, and they could be caused or coexisting with their substance use treatment. So we see that treatment is one part, but is not the whole challenge that they face. So treatment alone, no matter how good it is, no matter how wonderful the stuff is, treatment alone is not sufficient to make these people successful in their long-term recovery and in social integration. Because there are also the underlying condition of substance use disorder, different spectrum of that, but there are also some other conditions like poverty, lack of opportunities. There are sometimes limited education, problems with employment, transitioning to employment, and there are, as we have mentioned several times during these days, they are facing stigma, and at the bottom line, they stand alone and confused. And we don't want anyone to feel that way if we can do something about it. So, in order to produce also a very good intervention that is needed, we need to understand that there is no one-size-fits-all. there are different opportunities. And we are very conscious that depends on the country and depends on the context that we are working. There might be that this full spectrum on intervention is not available, but there are different intensive services. So this is an aspirational model, but nevertheless, we want to spend a little bit of time in seeing how we can be of support in identifying the strength and the needs and also the responsibility that this specific population might have. Because if we do the one-size-fits-all, we might end up in having some counterproductive interventions. So we want everything to be evidence-based. So the more we can invest in solid screening and assessment tools that give us a direction of which kind of therapeutic needs and criminogenic needs we need to take into consideration in the treatment and service plan, the more we can be effective in the work that we are doing. Specifically, there are individuals who have low criminogenic risk and low treatment needs, and this individual will be better not placed in a kind of therapeutic or residential setting, but being held with constant monitoring and follow-up. Other ones who are high risk but low treatment needs, they could do very well with community supervision. There are others who are low risk and high needs that might be a good fit for community treatment, and there are others who are high risk and high needs that will benefit probably with the drug treatment court or more therapeutic justice intervention, and there are others that unfortunately, due to the severity of the criminogenic needs, they need to be handled in prison settings. So this is all the range. There is also some money attached to it because different intervention costs different money, and we want to invest in quality. So quality of treatment is also to do with the resources that you put into it. But let's go back 1 second on how case care management works. We say the systemic approach, so it needs to be based on function, on pillars. And here we see all the steps going from screening and assessment, and the difference between that is the screening is just a very brief intervention where you can surface and identify some of the challenges, but then you need a strong and detailed assessment so that you can evaluate all the different areas, not just substance use disorder, but also all the other areas of needs. And based on that, then you go with planning, and planning is crucial to be done with the participant, for the participant, with the engagement of the participant, and then we have the linkages to the services you identify that are needed and are hopefully available in the community, and then there is this function of ongoing monitoring. There is the follow-up. It's not just referring people to treatment and services, but being there for being the reference person so that they know who to contact and who to go back with. And this goes hand in hand with the engagement and advocacy. People who are in the program at the beginning, they need more and more support to figure out and navigate the expectation, the things that they have to do, but they become more and more independent and functional along the way. And there is also a component of evaluation of how they are doing, evaluation of the program, so that they can get to the full completion. In doing that, case care management work with different actors and have a value with each one of these stakeholders, with the justice system because it's supporting the justice authority to have the informed decision on which kind of alternative it could be provided. It works very strongly with the participants along all the program, with connecting with health services and with social services. Everybody is part of the solution, and also with communities, engaging with them so that they be fully aware of this process. They can contribute to the social integration, providing opportunities for job training, job placement, and also being supportive overall within the social integration and far beyond. This is one of my last slides. I want just to mention that the case care management model is a complex model that have different function, as we said before, but they could be applied to all the interception on the justice system. Antonio was mentioning before some of the most common DTC or alternative to incarceration work, so they are very specific, but case care manager could be infused in each of every ATI program, from the pre-conviction to the post-conviction, from deflection to prosecutorial diversion. They are a strong ally, case care manager, in providing all these functions and in linking people to the service and the attention they need throughout the justice system continuum. And finally, just some highlighted here, you see the cover page of the case care management curriculum, which is available in English and Spanish. It's tailored to adult population, but we are intensively working on the CCM curriculum that is specific for adolescent population. So far, the only country who has been throughout all the process from the initial training to the launch of the pilot project and completion of the pilot project is Trinidad and Tobago. We are very proud to have worked with them along all this journey. But we have also held the training in Jamaica, in Trinidad and Tobago, as I said, in the Caribbean, and for Latin America to date, the country who received the training are Colombia and Costa Rica, and soon to be Dominican Republic. So we are looking forward to continuous developing this model, which, as I say, it goes with training, but a robust technical assistance so that the countries can learn about the model and create their own model and implementation that it makes sense with their reality, with the stakeholders that they have, with the partner that they need to engage, and we are there to accompany them along the way. So thank you for your attention and looking forward to the discussion afterwards.
Great. Thank you so much, Elisa. Really important to identify again some of the challenges that we work with in leveraging systems to implement evidence-based treatment and case management services. And I think you echoed the point that Antonio mentioned earlier about how critical it is, the transfer and rotation that we have among our key players that can help implement these systems, and that political regime change, people retiring, but having turnover in staff is so important. And so we have to build ways of, I think, institutional kind of policies, procedures, written types of guidelines that persist over time, even with the turnover in staff. But I think a really key point that Elisa shared with us is the importance of case management, right? Across different points in the system, that this is a complement to treatment, to evidence-based treatment for substance use disorders, and one that makes treatment much more effective. And that without that, in some cases, I would say, for example, reentry from prisons, without effective case management, you almost doom that population to failure, to relapse, to mortality due to overdose, et cetera, and to, of course, to return to crime. So important complement to substance use treatment. The research shows that case management is an effective component that increases retention and engagement in treatment and better outcomes in terms of arrest, substance use, employment, et cetera. And I think it also helps, as you mentioned, Elisa, to address the double stigma of substance use disorders, but also of criminal justice involvement. And so important, we just launched our recovery network, right? It's so important to have people with lived experience in the justice system and with substance use disorders to help in that process for case management and community support and reintegration. And finally, I think one other key point that you mentioned is the ability to triage and refer people to the right level of substance use treatment. And so, for example, having a case manager that's attached to the criminal courts to alert them to the fact the person has a substance use disorder, but it doesn't require treatment, or that they require intensive treatment, not just once a week outpatient treatment. So I think we know from evidence that poor matching to different levels of treatment according to severity of substance use disorders and criminal risk can lead to a poor implementation of resources and very poor outcomes as well. So Again, the importance of case management can't be emphasized. And then finally, just very exciting that we have this evidence-based curricula that's being implemented and available to all of you. And so I encourage you to contact Antonio and to Elisa, Elisa being the prime author of that curriculum. So thank you very much. Finally, I'm very excited to introduce our fourth and final panelist today. Joel Johnson serves as president and CEO of TASK, Treatment Alternatives for Safe Communities, which is a nonprofit organization in the U.S. that specializes in care coordination and case management for people with substance use and mental health disorders. Mr. Johnson is an internationally recognized expert in behavioral health. In 2021, he was elected to the board of directors of the National Association of Addiction Treatment Providers and also serves on the board of directors for the United States chapter of ISEP. So I'd like you to help me welcome Joel Johnson. Thank you.
Thank you. My colleagues, I don't want to be redundant, so some things I'm going to zip through because you've heard it already. I think more importantly, the case care management presentation that Elisa just shared with you, if you think about the concept she shared, TASK is a 50-year case study on that model, if you will, right? So the things that she talked about are things that we've been implementing and fine-tuning in Illinois. So TASK, our mission is that we're committed to building a healthier, safer, and more just society. And we do that through a series of services and interventions in Illinois and through our training and technical assistance via our Center for Health and Justice. Many of you know my colleague, Jack Charlier. So TASK serves the state of Illinois in 11 area offices serving all 102 counties in Illinois. And so for this audience, and put it into context, Illinois geographically is larger than Czechoslovakia or England. It is a little bit smaller than Belarus, but it's about the same size as Suriname, Nepal, and Bangladesh. From a population size, Illinois is about 12.4 million people, so we're about the size of Tunisia. We're larger than Sweden, larger than Belgium, larger than Haiti, just to give you context of the type of span and scope that we serve in our work on a daily basis. Our core service is specialized case management. That's our secret sauce, but we serve a full continuum from deflection to court-based intervention to reentry services and a growing number of specialties that we're developing, including housing and expansion of housing services. So TASK has been around for nearly 50 years, and through a serendipitous group of federal laws in the United States and state laws in Illinois, we became a nonprofit, and we enjoyed what was called a designated program. We were designated to provide an intervention to persons who are presenting in the criminal legal system with substance use issues, and we were the only organization in the state of Illinois for about 40 years to have that designated program across the state of Illinois. A number of organizations that we are affiliated with. So we know that there are far too many people incarcerated around the world, and a lot of them in the United States. Many of these people, of course, have substance use and or mental health disorders. Similarly, there are far too many people who we know have a substance use diagnosis, substance use disorders. 1 in 7 of these people go untreated. So TASK exists at its foundation at the intersection of these populations. We know that many of the people who are involved in the criminal legal system may not even, their substance use may not have become known as a part of the screening process. In many cases, and that number that I showed in the previous slide doesn't include the number of people still awaiting trial. Those are people who have been convicted and are in a carceral setting, but not those who are still being investigated. So in this case, 85% of the prison population has an active substance use disorder or was incarcerated for a drug-related crime. So we know there are a number of challenges that presents. There's a stigma of being criminally involved or accused or allegedly criminally involved, and there's a stigma of substance use or to be thought of as a substance user. Even substance use is a chronic illness, like mental health diagnosis is a chronic illnesses, but they carry a stigma unlike heart disease or COPD or asthma. These disorders are looked upon negatively, or we feel that they're looked upon negatively, and stigma is the #1 barrier to people seeking treatment. Similarly, being involved in the criminal legal system presents itself with a huge stigma. So now imagine having a substance use disorder and being involved in the criminal legal system, double stigma. Other barriers to addressing this dually involved population are the other, what we call social determinants of health, housing, legal source of income, food and transportation. Through our reentry services in Illinois, the #1 barrier to people successfully reentering and remaining at home right now is housing. Our ability to find people housing with a criminal background a lot of landlords in the United States and Illinois in our jurisdiction are weaponizing laws that will authorize them to prevent offering leases to people or providing safe and stable housing to people because of their criminal background. This is triggering for some people, and they may go back to whatever criminal activity caused them to come to the attention of the legal system and or relapse their substance use. There's a workforce challenge internationally, but in the United States and in Illinois, so we find it challenging to find nurses, psychiatrists, social workers, and addiction specialists who can help intervene in this population. So we're trying to do more with less, and we know what that's like. There's no such thing as doing more. You do less with less. Opportunities, though, those barriers create opportunities. Non-punitive support. There are far too many people in the carceral setting, many people whose needs could be addressed by addressing those social determinants of health. And so our ability through deflection, if you all saw the alternative incarceration presentation or know of the work of Jack and others, through deflection, getting in front of an arrest, getting people into treatment, and or diversion programming, helping reduce or eliminate sanctions after there's been an arrest by helping to address those social determinants through our case management model. Eliminating health disparities is a byproduct of that. You know, we are able to close health gaps, and then largely because of COVID, we've been able to expand our reach to populations by using telehealth. So this is really sums up, is almost like the spoken wheel slide that Elisa had, but this is our specialized case management model. And at the center of this, as you can see, is the client. Through the case management, we try and ingest all, and you can add more circles to this, employment, and other needs, transportation. The client stays at the center, and as long as we keep the client in the center, our case management model continually looks at opportunities to help address their unmet needs. I'd like to say we help people navigate deep end systems. In some cases, people come in through the criminal legal system, but they can come in through the child welfare system, they can come in through the housing system, they can come in through the public health system. Many times people fall into these safety nets and they get lost in these systems. Our case management model is there to pick them up, help empower them, and help them navigate these systems. And there's no single source that helps people navigate, so they're operating in silos. If we delink these circles, there would just be 4 circles operating in a silo, not really taking into account who the client population is. So the impact of this is our data, and this is as of 2023. Those adults in Illinois who were referred to task and to treatment, we had 20% higher success rate in completion of treatment. Those youth, we had about 11% higher success rate of completion of treatment. The slide that I didn't put in here is that for both persons who were referred to task for case management and to treatment were 70% less likely to relapse in a 2-year period and 70% less likely to recidivate back into the criminal legal system in that same 2-year period. There was a whole presentation on deflection yesterday, so I won't double down on it, but what deflection helps us do is get in front of that arrest, identify needs, and get people into treatment prior to an additional arrest or a single arrest, and saving, in this case, saving both resources, public resources, and time, and a burden on the infrastructure of our government, while empowering people to become well and healthy, right? And so in the United States, we have this dichotomy that we're existing with right now, which is, law and order. Let me do it philosophically. Law and order on the right, and what is known as defund the police, or making investments in non-police state activities. Deflection is really both. Deflection empowers us to move people to treatment before there's an arrest, and it allows police to focus on real crime in community. And so it is police that help invent and create this concept known as deflection, and they're becoming some of our biggest partners in terms of realizing how it empowers their departments to really focus on the things that community would like them to focus on, and helping us move people to treatment in what would be nuisance or quality of life issues that otherwise could be handled with in a clinical model. I'll save the conclusion for questions, and I'll just say that this is very similar to the case care management model, and that's not by mistake. And we look forward to continuing to work with all of you in this model. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Joel. Really impressive presentation. I think it fits nicely with the presentation that Elisa provided about the larger kind of scope of case care management. A couple just quick comments. For those of you that don't know, the TASK program in Illinois was the first in the country in the United States to implement system-wide case management and care for people in the criminal justice system across different criminal court dockets for every judge in every court in Illinois. Just really impressive, and I think the outcomes speak for themselves in terms of saving lives, keeping people out of prison, and reintegration into community successfully. So this is over 20 years of work that's been involved. So a really important type of model, the task model or case care management. I want to mention something that Joel indicated, which I think is really critically important for all of us working internationally, and that is the pretrial population in detention. And in many countries, I think this is a very important target population for case management, because the task model case management can identify people who have specific needs that can be treated in the community rather than being held in short or long-term detention. My experience is that many of the prison systems are overcrowded because of the pretrial detention population that could be minimized by use of case management in a systematic way to screen, assess, and then provide information to the courts about the importance of being able to divert these people to community dispositions. Of course, to make it with public safety concerns in mind and with adequate supervision and treatment services. So I think this could really help with the backlog of pretrial detainees in many countries. And a lot of countries that I've worked with have 60 to 70%, even higher rates of pretrial detainees in their prison system. So living in inhumane conditions, and those that could be bettered by involvement in the community, paying taxes, being involved in employment and with their families. I think another key thing that Joel mentioned is that case management can address problematic areas that otherwise undermine successful involvement in evidence-based treatment in the justice system. And so housing and homelessness. It's really hard to work with a population if somebody's living under a bridge with no financial support or food. They're not likely to come to treatment or benefit from that. You have to take care of these predicate or foundational issues first. Mental disorders, other aspects. Sometimes we don't consider these things as core elements of substance use treatment, but without them and without the help of case care management and case management services, these things aren't adequately addressed, right? And because of that, we have dropout and poor outcomes of treatment. So case management is so important with that, with medical conditions, right? Untreated diabetes or other heart conditions. Transportation. I mean, if you can't get to treatment, you're going to have poor outcomes, and judges are going to become cynical. What's going on? These people come back in front of me. Well, why is that they're not successfully engaged in treatment? Case management can help with all of these issues, and employment, vocational training, other things. The last thing I guess I'll mention is that Joel mentioned about the navigation of people in the justice system, especially as they come out of prisons or they're reintegrated into the community as a result of one of these alternative to incarceration programs. If we don't have effective case management services, if you think about it, the people in the justice system who have substance use disorders become their own case manager, right? And it's a daunting task to navigate different services that they need to get insurance or to find out even where a good program is for their co-occurring disorder or for their intensive needs for substance use treatment. I think the final thing that we may not think about very often is that I think case management helps to build trust in the treatment system. So I've worked with drug courts in the US since the early 1990s, and most criminal court judges at that point in the United States were very cynical about treatment because they would see people rapidly rotate through the justice system, rearrested time and time again. They would see the same people. They know them by name. And so they began to think that treatment doesn't work, even though they referred them to treatment. Case management helps to engage and retain people in treatment. So I think it provides such a valuable piece to ensure that treatment works, and thereby to gain the trust and confidence of some of these other areas in the justice system, correctional system, that may otherwise be suspicious and not really trustful. So let me end there. I think we have time for questions. I want to, first off, let's thank the panelists for the great presentations. And I think we have a microphone, so we have time for questions. So, yeah, of course.
Thank you, Roger. Before we take any question, I think that since we are at Eyes Up, maybe the participants to the panel would like to know that the driving force behind TASC and behind the CCM model is actually the Eyes Up chairperson, which is Melody Hibbs. She couldn't be with us today, but she is always behind many of the things we do. She's part of the strategic team at ICATI, so I just want to acknowledge her in this panel for all her inspirational and a leading force that bring us all together. And I just also want to mention that in my presentation I was mentioning the partnership with the international expert, and TASC has been instrumental in creating the case care management model along with CAMH, which is the Center for Addiction Mental Health in Canada. So what we try to do from the CICA standpoint is really taking this strong good practice and give them a shape that can help institutions in Latin America and the Caribbean and in the world, because the case care management model has been taught and implemented also in Africa, specifically in Kenya and in Nigeria with the support of UNODC, and in the Philippines with the support of Colombo Plan. So starting from this original experience, it has been created a model that can be implemented and replicated and adapted to the local reality, where in many countries it needs to be done with the government, along with the government and with governmental agency, and not so much in collaboration with NGO or led by NGO, but the model has a lot of strength and can provide really an asset to all the ATI program, or generally speaking to the people that have special needs, because it's beyond ATI, we are infusing with ATI, but it has a strong value for this connection that creates. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Elisa. And again, we have an incredible set of experts on our panel, so we have an opportunity to take some of your questions and also to share some of your experiences, perhaps, in implementing evidence-based treatment and case management in your countries. Who would like to start? Questions? Yeah, we have a question here.
Elisa me va a ayudar con la traducción porque veo que muchas de las personas no tienen auriculares. Muy buenas tardes para todos y todas. Joana Calderón, del Poder Judicial de Costa Rica. Yo quiero aprovechar la oportunidad para poder decirles que muchas veces el implementar estos programas nos parece que está alejado de la realidad.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Giovanna Calderon from Costa Rica. I work at the Judiciary of Costa Rica, and I just want to share some of my experience. Sometimes when we look at this program, we think they are very far from our reality.
Y que estamos, los que creemos en esto, solos, y que tal vez vemos que no va a ser posible porque quienes toman las decisiones políticas o de presupuesto no están creyendo en esto al inicio.
Many times, all the people that believes in this program, they face some challenges because sometimes they feel like they don't have the political buy-in, they don't have the financial resources, so they feel alone and they stand against many challenges.
Pero con mucha constancia, con evidencia, con evaluación, podemos hacer cambiar de opinión a estas personas. Y en el caso de Costa Rica, que iniciamos en el año 2013 con el programa de tratamiento de drogas bajo supervisión judicial, gracias a CICAT, OEA y todo el apoyo técnico que nos dio para construir esto y que nos ha apoyado durante todos estos años, incluso con evaluaciones, ya logramos tener el procedimiento en una ley de la República que no depende de políticas, sino que ahora es de acatamiento obligatorio para todas las autoridades judiciales.
But despite of all these challenges, if you really believe you can make it, you can build up something. Specifically, in the case of Costa Rica, we started in 2013, and we started with a pilot program of treatment under judicial supervision, and with the technical support of CICAD OES, with strong evaluation, diagnostic studies, and planning, we could set up a framework that then became a law and now is implemented in throughout all the country.
Así que el espacio es para agradecer ese apoyo, pero además para motivar a los que están iniciando o a los que a veces creen que no se va a poder lograr, para que sigan adelante, porque muchas de las personas en el mundo con problemas de consumo de drogas que llegan al sistema judicial merecen una oportunidad. Y sé que de las personas que están aquí es porque creen y tienen la capacidad de lograrlo en cada uno de sus países. Muchas gracias.
Y como aprovecho de este espacio porque quiero enfatizar este mensaje, que todas las personas que tienen la motivación de hacer este cambio... I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. It happens when you're tired. I need more coffee. I just want to take advantage of this space because I want to share this message of hope in the line with all the things that have been said at this conference. You are not alone, and if you really believe in the changes and you believe that the person that we serve that are in this program, they deserve a chance, this could happen. So I want to share this successful story with all of you, that it could be inspirational for many of you.
That's a great case study of success of implementation of these types of approaches. Thank you so much for sharing that. Other questions that we have before? We have some time for additional questions or comments. Yeah, and back here.
Hi, I'm Dr. Clara Pudiranan from the Philippines. ATI is something new to us, but we're working on it. And I think everybody would agree that any change that we have, we meet a lot of challenges. And I think one of the most challenging part here is to be able to place it inside the law. We really believe that one of the most challenging part here is to be able to let the legislative body agree and support the ATI. One of the things that they've been worried about is for ATI to be abused by some of the PDLs or persons deprived of liberty. And I think it would be best that we really need to work on those who would be doing the triage, those who will be assessing for the patients or for the PDLs who would be placed in our ATIs. Because if not, it will really be abused by some of them. Second is, of course, the human resource. There is a real need, as mentioned by one of the speakers, there is a real need that people, the service providers, the implementers, would be given some help, support for additional workforce. Because if not, they will all be burned out, and of course, we know what will happen. Quality will really be affected. Thank you.
Sure. Well, the workforce issue, let's start there, is an international issue. What we have done as empowered persons with lived experience, people who are in recovery, who have walked this path, they've been part of both the criminal legal system as well as in recovery from substance use disorder, who have come back either as health workers or peer support specialists, or even got credentialed and degreed and come back in a number of capacities, right? And so we seek and support persons with lived experience to join our workforce because they also have something that no classroom training can teach you, right? They've been literally in the shoes that the people we're working with have been in, and so that's invaluable. So to the extent that that's possible in the Philippines or anywhere else to empower persons with lived experience to come and join your workforce, I'd recommend that. The first part of your question, the case management models support recovery, right? Absent the case management, it's treatment. And we talked about that in one of the presentations. Recovery has to be nurtured and supported. And so it's that long-term intervention of case management that helps nurture the long-term success of recovery in many cases. And so I think working with the stakeholders in the Philippines to help understand that, and this is again a training opportunity for care case management to bring those stakeholders to the table to understand how this could best support them and have a positive impact on the government infrastructure.
Thank you so much for your question. I think that's very important to clarify that there are concerns about people exploiting opportunities, but I just want to mention also that all the person the CCM work with, they are not 100% deficit. These person have also strength and their potential. And I believe that all the professionals who work in treatment and in recovery has so much passion and experience to deal with it. Because oftentimes people that are going through the justice system is because also of, as we mentioned before, lack of opportunities. So sometimes they never had an opportunity, not just for treatment, but also life skills. So once these people get in touch with one sparkle of hope, they will also do all what it takes to hold on to it. And that will have a transformative power in their life. And that's why the case care manager is there for them. There's going to be ups and downs, yes. There's going to be bumps along the road, yes. Is a difficult path? Also. But there is hope. And we all believe in the transformative power of handing out help, handing out a hand, and that will generate a multiplier effect to continue. And in terms of support, yes, support is needed because burnout is real. And sometimes people who are full of passion, but they don't have the institutional support, they don't have enough resources, they will be burnout in the long term. So it's really important to generate these mechanisms, and that's why we say it's a team. We don't want to build one case manager because he will be alone. We don't want him to be alone. We want to be in a team so they can also support each other, sharing experience, and be there for the participants and get stronger. So on one side, we invest in training them, but also for them to having a support system. And I also want to mention that sometimes this support system take also the form of a mentorship program that, for example, we implement in Trinidad and Tobago. They say we need an additional layer of care for our participants so that we create and then we invested in creating peer-to-peer support where possible, or also what the Colombo plan and the other curriculum called the Ally, so that we can generate this kind of support in the community so that the participant and the case care manager will have an additional layer of support in handling many of the situations.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elisa. I think we had one last quick question from the judge, or a comment from the judge from Trinidad and Tobago.
Thanks. It's just Judge Henderson from Trinidad and Tobago. Just to address my colleague from the Philippines. So Trinidad and Tobago, we, like Costa Rica, we had a pilot project which was in 2011 and rolled out in 2012. And there was a huge amount of skepticism, which was articulated by my friend, that it would be the subject of abuse, that people would see it as a soft option. But I think, which is why we went the policy route, and when it was shown to be working, then there was a lot of buy-in. But I think at the heart of it, when people understand that the program is staffed by professionals, there's a judicial officer, there's a probation services who have access to, there's health services on board. So even though some people may consider it, quote unquote, like a woke option or a soft option, but by looking at the team who is managing each individual client, so to speak, and you're looking at the composition, that goes a long way to reducing that skepticism and, of course, the outcome. That's just
Great.
my input, Roger. Thanks very much.
That's very helpful. Thank you so much. And I want to thank all of you for participating in a kind of a dimly lit room after lunch and staying with us. Very helpful. And I know if you have a chance to contact any of our panelists during the conference or after the session today, they'd be more than happy to talk with you. But again, please join me in thanking our panelists one more time. Thanks so much. Have a great conference.